Sometimes the quietest person in the room understands the most. The old woman signed slowly, her hands trembling slightly in the warm chandelier light. And for a moment no one at the table seemed to know how to respond except the shy waitress standing beside her. The restaurant was the kind of place where people spoke in low voices about million-dollar deals while crystal glasses clinked softly against white tablecloths. The kind of place where the air smelled faintly of aged wine and polished wood, where a single dinner could cost more than most families spent in a week. At table 12 sat Marcus Blackwood, one of the youngest billionaires in America, a man whose name appeared regularly on business magazine covers and whose company shaped markets across the country. Yet tonight his attention was not on contracts or investors, but on the elegant silver-haired woman seated beside him, his mother Eleanor Blackwood, who watched the world in silence because she had lost her hearing almost 20 years earlier. Most evenings like this followed the same quiet pattern. Waiters approached the table with polite smiles, spoke too quickly, realized she could not hear them, then awkwardly looked toward Marcus to translate. And Marcus had grown used to stepping in, used to the uncomfortable pauses, used to the way conversations seemed to move around his mother instead of including her. It was not cruelty, just unfamiliarity, the quiet distance that appears when people do not know how to communicate. But tonight something different happened. The young waitress assigned to their table moved with a calm, unhurried grace that made her almost invisible among the staff rushing between tables, her name tag reading Emily Carter, her dark blonde hair tied back neatly, her posture steady despite the crowded dining room filled with powerful guests. She approached Eleanor not with the usual uncertain smile, but with a small nod of respect, and instead of speaking, she lifted her hands gently into the air. Marcus noticed it immediately, the subtle motion that made him pause mid-sentence while explaining a business proposal to the investors seated across from him. Emily's hands began to move with quiet confidence, shaping words in the air with a fluency that was unmistakable to anyone who knew the language of silence. "Good evening, Mrs. Blackwood," she signed with a warm, welcoming expression. "I hope you're enjoying your night." Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise, the kind of surprise that slowly transforms into joy, and within seconds her own hands began to move in response, faster now, energized by the rare chance to be understood without effort. The investors at the table stopped speaking one by one as they realized what was happening, the low hum of conversation fading into curiosity, while the young waitress and the billionaire's mother continued their conversation entirely without sound. Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair, studying Emily with a look of quiet disbelief because this was not the hesitant signing of someone who had memorized a few polite phrases. This was fluent, natural communication, the kind that came from years of practice and patience. Eleanor laughed softly, the first genuine laugh Marcus had heard from her all evening, and the sound turned several heads across the dining room. The shy waitress simply smiled in response, continuing the conversation as if nothing unusual had happened, as if speaking through silence was the most ordinary thing in the world. Around them the elegant restaurant seemed to pause for a moment, forks suspended above plates, wine glasses hovering midair, curious eyes watching the quiet exchange unfold. And Marcus Blackwood, a man who had spent his life commanding attention in boardrooms and negotiations, suddenly realized that the most remarkable presence in the entire room was not a billionaire at the head of the table, but the soft-spoken waitress whose hands were gently bringing his mother's world back into conversation. Emily Carter did not notice the room watching her, because she had spent most of her life learning how to be invisible. In restaurants like La Fontaine, that skill mattered more than people realized. The dining room was filled with executives, investors, and socialites who measured time in quarterly earnings and stock prices, and for them the staff often blended into the background like polished silverware or quiet piano music drifting through the air. Emily understood that rhythm well. She moved through the restaurant with calm efficiency, carrying trays, refilling glasses, and checking on tables without interrupting conversations that sounded important enough to shape companies or markets. Yet tonight something had shifted. At table 12, Eleanor Blackwood continued speaking with her hands, her graceful movements quick and animated as she asked Emily questions about the menu, the restaurant, and even the painting hanging on the wall behind the bar. Emily responded easily, her own hands moving with natural rhythm, explaining that the salmon was the chef's specialty and that the painting had been there since the restaurant opened 15 years earlier. For Eleanor, the conversation flowed like fresh air after a long silence, and the quiet delight on her face made Emily smile without even realizing it. Marcus Blackwood watched every movement carefully, his sharp eyes studying the young waitress with the same attention he usually reserved for business negotiations. Something about her composure caught his interest. Most employees in places like this showed a hint of nervousness when serving someone as recognizable as him, but Emily did not seem intimidated at all. She was respectful, calm, and completely focused on making his mother comfortable. One of the investors across the table leaned slightly toward Marcus and whispered that it was impressive that the restaurant had staff trained in sign language. But Marcus did not respond immediately. He knew the management here well, and he had never seen anyone communicate with Eleanor so fluently before. Emily finished explaining the menu, and then signed a gentle question asking Eleanor if she preferred the herbal tea she usually ordered. Eleanor nodded with obvious appreciation and signed back that Emily had remembered her favorite drink. Marcus raised an eyebrow at that detail because even he had not realized his mother had visited this restaurant before. Emily excused herself politely and walked toward the kitchen to place the order, her steps steady and unhurried, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. As she moved through the dining room, several guests glanced toward her with curiosity, whispering quietly to one another about the graceful conversation they had just witnessed. Inside the kitchen, the atmosphere was warmer and louder, filled with the sounds of pans sizzling and cooks calling out orders. Emily handed the ticket to the chef and waited calmly while he read it. He gave her a brief nod and began preparing the tea while asking if table 12 needed anything else. Emily simply smiled and said that they were fine for now. For her, the moment had been ordinary, just another small effort to make a guest feel welcome. But back in the dining room, Marcus Blackwood leaned back in his chair and folded his hands together thoughtfully, realizing that the shy waitress who had appeared so ordinary a few minutes earlier had quietly changed the entire atmosphere at the table. His mother was smiling more than she had in weeks. The conversation felt warmer, and for the first time that evening, the powerful billionaire found himself wondering who Emily Carter really was, and how someone working quietly between dinner tables had learned to speak the language that had reopened his mother's world. Marcus Blackwood had built his reputation on noticing details that others ignored. In boardrooms, he could read hesitation in a handshake or uncertainty in a single sentence, and those instincts had helped him turn a modest technology firm into a company valued in the billions. Tonight, those same instincts were focused entirely on the quiet waitress moving between tables with steady patience. When Emily Carter returned from the kitchen carrying a small silver tray, Marcus observed the subtle confidence in her posture, the way she balanced the porcelain teapot and delicate cup without spilling a drop even as the restaurant buzzed around her. She placed the cup gently in front of Eleanor Blackwood and signed that the herbal tea needed a moment to cool before drinking. Eleanor nodded appreciatively and signed back a playful comment about how patience was easier when the company was pleasant. Emily laughed softly at the remark, the sound warm but restrained, and for a brief moment the two women looked like old friends catching up rather than strangers meeting during dinner service. Marcus leaned slightly forward, curiosity growing stronger with each passing second. Across the table, one of his investors attempted to resume the earlier discussion about a new development project in San Diego, mentioning square footage and projected revenue numbers. But Marcus found himself only half listening. His attention drifted repeatedly toward the quiet exchange happening beside him. Eleanor signed another question, this time asking Emily how she had learned to communicate so fluently. Emily hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering with calm honesty. She signed that her younger brother had been born without hearing and that she had grown up learning the language of hands long before she learned the language of business or restaurants. Eleanor's expression softened instantly, the kind of understanding that came only from shared experience. She responded with a gentle story about the day she first lost her hearing, explaining how the world had suddenly become quiet in a way that felt frightening and lonely at the same time. Emily listened with respectful attention, nodding slightly as Eleanor spoke, her hands occasionally offering small signs of encouragement that told the older woman she was fully understood. Marcus watched the conversation unfold and felt something unfamiliar settle in his thoughts. For years he had tried to shield his mother from the awkwardness that often followed her into public places. Yet here was a young woman who removed that barrier without effort or attention. No announcements, no grand gestures, just quiet understanding. When Emily finished pouring the tea, she stepped back politely, giving Eleanor space to enjoy the moment. But before she could leave the table, Eleanor gently touched her sleeve and signed one more question. She asked whether Emily had always worked in restaurants. Emily shook her head and signed that she had once studied linguistics in college, fascinated by how languages connect people who would otherwise remain strangers. But life had changed quickly when her father passed away and her family needed support. She had taken the first job she could find and discovered that even in a busy restaurant, there were still opportunities to help people feel seen. Eleanor smiled warmly at that explanation and signed that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the quietest places. Marcus lowered his glass slowly as he watched the exchange, realizing that the shy waitress who seemed so ordinary on the surface possessed a depth of character that many powerful people in the room might never understand. And for the first time that evening, the billionaire who was accustomed to being the most interesting person at the table felt genuinely curious about someone else's story. The quiet rhythm of the evening slowly returned to the restaurant, but the atmosphere at table 12 had changed in a way that everyone nearby could feel. Eleanor Blackwood sat a little straighter in her chair now, her silver hair catching the warm light from the chandelier above as she lifted her teacup with steady hands. The smile on her face had not faded since Emily Carter first began speaking with her through the graceful language of moving hands. For Eleanor, the experience felt rare and refreshing, like opening a window after a long winter. She signed another small comment to Emily, telling her that the tea was perfect and that it reminded her of the blend she once drank during a summer trip to Vermont many years ago. Emily nodded with genuine interest and replied that she had never been to Vermont, but had heard the mountains there were beautiful during the fall when the leaves turned red and gold. Eleanor's eyes brightened at the shared image, and for a moment the conversation drifted gently between memories and small observations that had nothing to do with business or status. Around them, the elegant restaurant continued its quiet performance. Servers carried plates carefully between tables. The low hum of conversation floated through the air, and the pianist near the bar played a soft melody that blended into the background like a calm heartbeat. Yet Marcus Blackwood remained unusually quiet. The billionaire watched Emily closely, not with suspicion, but with the focused attention of someone trying to understand something unexpected. Throughout his career, he had met thousands of people who wanted something from him, whether it was a partnership, an investment, or a chance to stand closer to power. Emily Carter did not appear to want anything at all. She simply stood beside the table with calm patience, making sure Eleanor understood every part of the dining experience. One of Marcus's associates finally cleared his throat and attempted once more to steer the conversation back toward business. He began describing a potential development project outside Phoenix, mentioning land values and construction timelines measured in square feet and months of planning. Marcus listened politely for a moment, but the numbers felt distant compared to the quiet exchange unfolding beside him. Eleanor suddenly signed a question toward Emily that made the young waitress pause thoughtfully. She asked whether Emily ever missed the path she had once imagined while studying linguistics, the academic world filled with books, lectures, and research rather than trays and dinner shifts. Emily considered the question carefully before responding. She signed that life rarely follows the plans people draw in notebooks when they are younger. Sometimes responsibilities appear that are more important than ambitions, and sometimes helping the people who need you most becomes the path itself. Eleanor studied her face for a moment and then nodded slowly with understanding. Marcus noticed the sincerity in Emily's expression, the quiet honesty that could not easily be rehearsed or imitated. It reminded him of something his father once said when Marcus was still building his first company in a small office barely larger than a living room. His father had told him that character was revealed most clearly when no one was expecting to be impressive. As Emily stepped back slightly to check on another nearby table, Marcus followed her movement with his eyes. In the soft glow of the restaurant lights, he realized that the shy waitress who had walked into his evening like a quiet breeze had already changed the tone of the entire dinner. For the first time that night, the powerful billionaire felt less interested in closing deals and more interested in understanding the story of the young woman who seemed to carry a quiet strength that could not be measured in dollars or headlines. Emily Carter returned to table 12 a few minutes later carrying 2 plates balanced carefully on her tray, the warm scent of roasted salmon and lemon butter drifting softly through the air as she set them down with practiced precision. Eleanor Blackwood watched her with quiet appreciation, her eyes following the smooth movements of Emily's hands as she placed each dish exactly where it belonged. Before stepping back, Emily signed a small explanation about the preparation, describing the herbs the chef had used and recommending that Eleanor try the sauce while it was still warm. Eleanor responded with a delighted nod and lifted her fork, clearly enjoying the rare experience of understanding everything happening at the table without needing Marcus to interpret. Marcus noticed the subtle change immediately. For years he had acted as the bridge between his mother and the hearing world around her. But tonight that bridge had quietly been replaced by someone who understood the language of silence better than most people understood spoken words. Across the table, one of Marcus's colleagues leaned closer and whispered that the waitress seemed unusually attentive, but Marcus did not answer right away. Instead, he watched Emily step away to assist another table, where an older couple struggled slightly with the menu under the dim lighting. Emily knelt beside them briefly, pointing out the most popular dishes and adjusting the small candle so the menu text became easier to read. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable in the busy restaurant, yet it carried the same calm care she had shown Eleanor moments earlier. Marcus had spent his entire career studying efficiency and performance, analyzing how systems functioned and how people responded under pressure, and he recognized something quietly remarkable in Emily's behavior. She moved through the dining room with the patience of someone who believed every guest deserved the same level of attention regardless of their status or wealth. When she returned to table 12 to refill Eleanor's tea, Marcus finally spoke directly to her for the first time that evening. His voice was calm but curious as he asked how long she had worked at La Fontaine. Emily answered politely that it had been almost 2 years. She explained that the restaurant manager had taken a chance on her when she first arrived in the city looking for steady work. Marcus nodded thoughtfully and asked another question that surprised even himself. He asked whether she had ever considered returning to school to continue studying linguistics. Emily paused for a moment before responding. She signed toward Eleanor and then spoke softly so Marcus could follow along. She said that education was always important, but sometimes life moved in unexpected directions, and right now helping support her younger brother while he finished high school mattered more than returning to a classroom. Eleanor listened carefully and then placed her hand gently over Emily's for a moment, signing a message of encouragement that carried both warmth and respect. Emily thanked her with a quiet smile before stepping back again, giving the table space to enjoy their meal. Marcus watched the brief exchange with thoughtful eyes. In a room filled with people who measured success through wealth and influence, the shy waitress had revealed something far more difficult to quantify. She carried responsibility without bitterness and kindness without expectation. As the dinner continued and the soft music of the piano drifted across the room, Marcus Blackwood began to realize that the most valuable lessons in leadership did not always appear inside conference rooms or financial reports. Sometimes they appeared quietly between tables in the form of a young woman who understood that dignity could be offered through the smallest gestures. The dinner continued with a quiet rhythm that felt calmer than when the evening had begun, and for Eleanor Blackwood the restaurant no longer felt like a room filled with distant conversations she could not follow, but a place where she could finally participate without hesitation. She ate slowly, enjoying both the meal and the rare comfort of speaking freely with someone who understood her language without effort. Every few minutes, Emily Carter returned briefly to check that everything was going well, her movements graceful and attentive without ever feeling intrusive. When Eleanor finished her tea, Emily replaced the cup with a fresh pot before Eleanor even needed to ask, a small act of anticipation that made the older woman smile again. Marcus Blackwood observed everything quietly, noticing details the way he always did when evaluating someone's abilities. He watched the way Emily listened fully before responding, the way she made eye contact with people even when they spoke softly or hesitantly, and the way she balanced professionalism with genuine warmth. These were qualities he rarely saw even among highly trained executives in his own company. Across the table, one of Marcus's associates commented that the salmon was excellent and asked Emily whether the restaurant sourced its ingredients locally. Emily explained that the chef preferred suppliers within a 300-mile radius whenever possible and that many of the herbs were grown in a small greenhouse outside the city. Her explanation was clear and thoughtful, revealing a level of familiarity with the restaurant's operations that went far beyond memorizing a menu. Eleanor watched this exchange carefully and then signed something to Emily that made the young waitress pause with a surprised smile. She had asked whether Emily enjoyed teaching sign language to others because she noticed the patience in the way Emily communicated. Emily responded that she sometimes volunteered at a community center on weekends where children with hearing loss practiced communication through games and storytelling. Marcus felt a quiet shift in his thoughts when he heard that detail. The idea of spending free time helping strangers without any personal benefit was unfamiliar in the circles he moved through, where time was usually measured in profit or influence. Eleanor signed again, asking what had inspired Emily to volunteer there in the first place. Emily explained gently that when her younger brother first lost much of his hearing during childhood, it had been difficult for him to feel included at school, and the volunteers at that same center had helped him learn to communicate confidently again. Now that he was doing better, Emily believed it was important to offer the same support to other families who might feel lost in the beginning. Eleanor listened with deep attention and then signed something that made Marcus pause. She said that sometimes, the people who help others the most are the ones who remember exactly how it feels to struggle quietly. Emily lowered her eyes for a moment with modest gratitude before returning to her calm smile. As she stepped away to assist another table, Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked toward his mother. Eleanor met his gaze and signed slowly so he could follow. She told him that the young woman had something rare that could not be purchased or taught in boardrooms. She had empathy. Marcus looked across the dining room toward Emily Carter as she helped a young couple celebrate their anniversary with a small dessert and a congratulatory note written in chocolate across the plate. In that moment, the billionaire understood that the quiet waitress who moved so gently through the restaurant carried a kind of influence that was not measured in headlines or financial reports. It was measured in the way people felt seen when she spoke to them, even when the conversation happened entirely without sound. Marcus Blackwood had attended thousands of business dinners in his life, but he could not remember the last time a simple evening at a restaurant had made him think this much. Normally, his mind stayed several steps ahead of the present moment, calculating risks, evaluating opportunities, analyzing every conversation as if it were part of a negotiation. Yet tonight the calculations felt strangely unimportant. His attention kept drifting back to the quiet waitress who moved through the dining room with steady patience, carrying plates and glasses with the calm confidence of someone who understood exactly where she belonged. Emily Carter was assisting another table when Marcus noticed something small but revealing. A young busboy standing near the service station seemed to hesitate while organizing a tray of silverware. The boy looked barely 17, and his movements carried the awkward uncertainty of someone still learning the rhythm of a busy restaurant. Emily paused beside him and signed a quick message with her hands before speaking softly so he could follow along. Marcus recognized the gesture immediately. She was explaining something in sign language again, slower this time, guiding the boy through a simple phrase. The busboy repeated the signs carefully, concentrating on each movement until Emily nodded with quiet approval. Then she gave him a small, encouraging smile before continuing toward the next table. Marcus leaned slightly forward in his chair as he watched the exchange. It was not part of her job description to teach anyone sign language in the middle of a dinner rush, yet she had done it naturally, as if helping others learn was simply part of how she moved through the world. Eleanor Blackwood noticed the moment as well. She followed Marcus's gaze across the dining room and then signed a brief comment toward him. She said that kindness often revealed itself in the moments people believed no one was watching. Marcus nodded slowly, realizing she was right. Across the room, Emily now stood beside a family with two small children, patiently answering questions about the dessert menu while the younger child tried to pronounce the name of a chocolate cake that sounded far more complicated than it looked. Emily listened with genuine attention, offering a gentle explanation and even drawing a small picture on the child's napkin to help him understand what the dessert looked like. The parents laughed quietly, clearly grateful for the patience. Marcus had spent years hiring employees with impressive resumes and polished credentials, yet he knew that qualities like patience, empathy, and attentiveness could not be taught through formal training programs. They came from character. When Emily returned once more to table 12 to check whether Eleanor needed anything else, Marcus finally spoke again. His voice carried the thoughtful tone he usually reserved for serious conversations. He asked whether the young busboy was learning sign language from her. Emily glanced briefly toward the service station and nodded. She explained that the boy's younger sister had recently begun losing her hearing, and he wanted to learn how to communicate with her more easily at home. Emily said she was only helping him practice a few phrases during quiet moments between orders. Eleanor listened to this explanation and then signed something that made Marcus pause. She said that people often believed leadership meant standing in front of others, but sometimes true leadership meant quietly helping someone take their first step. Marcus looked at Emily Carter with renewed respect. In a room filled with powerful executives and influential investors, the shy waitress had just demonstrated a form of leadership that required no title, no authority, and no spotlight. And for the first time that evening, Marcus Blackwood began to wonder whether the most meaningful impact a person could have might happen far away from boardrooms and financial headlines, in the quiet spaces where small acts of understanding slowly change someone's world. By the time the main course plates had been cleared from the table, the atmosphere at La Fontaine had softened into the warm, unhurried rhythm that usually settled over the restaurant later in the evening. Soft piano music drifted across the room, and the glow from the chandeliers reflected gently against polished glass and silverware. Eleanor Blackwood rested her hands comfortably on the table, her expression calm and content in a way Marcus had not seen for a long time. Normally, dinners in crowded restaurants exhausted her because so much of the evening happened around her rather than with her, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she had been part of every conversation. Emily Carter returned once more with a small dessert tray balanced carefully on her arm. She placed a delicate slice of lemon tart in front of Eleanor and then signed a brief explanation that the chef liked to finish the evening with something light rather than heavy. Eleanor smiled immediately and signed back that the dessert looked beautiful. Marcus watched the exchange with quiet attention, noticing again how naturally Emily moved between spoken words and sign language, bridging two different worlds with effortless grace. After a moment, Eleanor signed something longer, her hands moving slowly but deliberately. She asked Emily whether she had ever thought about teaching sign language professionally. Emily seemed slightly surprised by the question and paused before answering. She explained that teaching had once crossed her mind while she was still studying linguistics, but life had changed quickly when her father became ill and the family needed support. Since then, she had simply focused on doing whatever work allowed her to help her brother and keep their household stable. Eleanor listened carefully and then signed something that made Emily's eyes widen slightly. She told her that sometimes the path people take without planning becomes the one that reveals their greatest strength. Marcus followed the conversation closely, reading his mother's signs with the familiarity that came from years of practice. When Eleanor finished, Marcus spoke quietly to Emily, asking if she enjoyed helping people learn the language the way she had helped the young busboy earlier that evening. Emily nodded with a modest smile and explained that communication meant more to her than most people realized because she had watched how quickly someone could feel isolated when others did not understand them. She said that every time she helped someone learn even a few simple signs, it felt like opening a door that had been closed before. Eleanor placed her hand gently over her heart and signed a simple word that carried deep meaning: respect. Marcus noticed the quiet emotion in the moment and felt something shift inside his thoughts again. For years, his world had revolved around competition, ambition, and success measured in numbers and influence. Yet here in the middle of a busy restaurant, a shy waitress had created a moment of connection that none of his wealth or status could have arranged. Emily stepped back politely once the dessert had been served, preparing to continue her duties with other tables. But before she could leave, Marcus spoke again. His voice was thoughtful rather than commanding. He told her that his mother rarely enjoyed restaurant evenings as much as she had tonight, and that her patience had made a difference he could not ignore. Emily answered gently that she had only done what anyone should do when another person needed understanding. Eleanor watched the brief exchange and then signed one final message to Marcus. She told him that sometimes the people who change our perspective the most are the ones who never intended to do so. Marcus looked toward Emily Carter as she moved quietly toward another table, her calm presence blending again into the flow of the restaurant. And he realized that the lesson his mother had just expressed was already becoming clear. Influence did not always arrive through power or wealth. Sometimes it arrived through quiet kindness offered without expectation. The evening slowly drew toward its natural conclusion as the soft music near the bar faded into a gentler melody, and the last few tables in the restaurant finished their meals beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers. At table 12, Marcus Blackwood placed his napkin neatly beside his plate and glanced toward his mother. Eleanor Blackwood looked more relaxed than she had at the beginning of the night, her posture calm and her eyes bright with quiet satisfaction. For years, Marcus had watched her navigate public places with patience and dignity, even when communication barriers made simple interactions difficult. Tonight had been different. Tonight, someone had stepped forward without hesitation and opened the conversation in a language many people never took the time to learn. Emily Carter returned once more to the table carrying the check folder with the same calm presence she had maintained all evening. She placed it gently near Marcus and then signed a small message toward Eleanor, thanking her for visiting and wishing her a pleasant evening. Eleanor responded immediately, her hands moving with warmth as she signed that the pleasure had been hers and that the young waitress had made the entire dinner memorable. Emily lowered her eyes slightly with modest appreciation before preparing to step away, but Marcus spoke again before she could leave. His voice was thoughtful and sincere in a way that surprised even him. He told Emily that she had done something simple yet meaningful that evening, something many people would not have even considered. He explained that for most restaurants his mother often felt like an observer rather than a participant in the experience, but tonight she had been included in every moment. Emily listened quietly before answering with a gentle smile. She said that communication was never a small thing because understanding another person always changed the way the world felt to them. Eleanor watched the exchange and then signed something that made Marcus pause. She told him that the young woman had reminded her of a lesson she once taught him when he was still a boy, learning how to treat others with respect. Eleanor signed slowly so Marcus would not miss a word. She said that the most important voices in a room were often the quietest ones, because they spoke not to be noticed, but to make someone else feel seen. Marcus looked at Emily Carter with a thoughtful expression, realizing that the lesson his mother described had appeared again tonight in the most unexpected place. He signed a brief message to Eleanor acknowledging her words before turning back to Emily. Instead of offering a business card or a formal invitation as he might have done with someone whose talents impressed him, Marcus simply said 2 words that carried genuine respect. "Thank you." Emily nodded politely, accepting the gratitude without any hint of pride or expectation. She wished them a safe evening and moved quietly toward another table where a group of guests had just arrived. Within moments, she blended back into the steady rhythm of the restaurant, carrying menus and answering questions with the same calm patience she had shown all night. Marcus and Eleanor stood from their table and walked slowly toward the entrance. As they reached the door, Eleanor gently touched Marcus's arm and signed one final thought before they stepped out into the cool night air. She told him that success could build companies and fortunes, but kindness built something far more lasting in people's hearts. Marcus looked back briefly through the glass doors of the restaurant and saw Emily Carter moving gracefully between tables, speaking through both words and hands with quiet understanding. And in that moment, the billionaire realized that sometimes the most powerful influence in a room did not belong to the wealthiest person present, but to the one who understood how to make others feel heard even in silence.